Welcome. Welcome. This is Matthew Mansell. That is my name. You are watching my show, my my YouTube video. I have no name for what this is going to be. It's just me going over the political compass test. I've watched Karen Ann Harlow's on uh, uh, Pink Flames for Liberty go over the test, and I wanted to do it too. Um, Namely, because there are things I'm going to point out things that are wrong with the test, and so I'm not just going to make it or going use it and note um, or take the test and note what my positions are and the arguments that I will use in favor of those positions or against, but also critique the test itself. Without further ado, let's go through it. I'm at politicalcompass.org org is where I'm at. Let me go to the test itself real quick, and let me. There we go. Political. Take the test. We do not want this. Close. Alright. Just a few propositions to start with concerning no less how you see the country and the world. By the country, the place you reside, the world at large, national, international uh, issues. So the first question, if economic globalization is inevitable, that means it's going to happen no matter what the hell you do. You can't control it. You can't stop it. It should primarily serve humanity rather than the interests of self or transnational corporations. So, this is asking you, what is the purpose of it's how should globalization happen? What is its purpose? If it should take place, it meaning globalization should serve humanity rather than the interest of transnational corporations. This sounds good. Well, technically, I would agree that it's better preferable to serve humanity, but these aren't always necessarily incompatible propositions. So there are times where the interest of transnational corporations do align with the interest of, quote, humanity, whatever the hell that is. It's vague into what that means. Everyone would basically should agree that, oh, yeah, if we're going to do this, it should serve humanity. The question is what that looks like. In this case, it is contrasting the interest of humanity with the interest of transnational corporations. By transnational, I mean corporations that deal business in multiple countries. So it could be like a business that has headquarters in the United States, Great Britain, China, and whatnot. Um, there should be a nuanced answer. Because it's nuanced, I'm going to slightly agree for that because of that nuance. But otherwise, I would say yes, it should primarily serve the interest of, quote, humanity in principle. That may or may not be the same as the interest of a transnational corporation. Sometimes those interests are not aligned. In fact, transnational corporations generally are pushed forward by and supported by the state. I'd always support my country, whether it was right or wrong. I'm going to disagree strongly, and by country here it means not just the country. I take by what it means the country. What is meant by country is the state, the government. So if you're supporting, let's say if you're a Cuban, I support my country no matter what, whether it's right or wrong, no matter what it does. Well, it is the Cuban government. Like, no. Or in Great Britain, I support my country here doesn't mean you support the civilian population of Great Britain. It means you support the crown and the politicians. That's how I read this question, and I think that's what the authors of the quiz meant when it asked that question. And I would say strongly no. I support. Well, I don't support the state at all, but if I do support an action taken by the state, it's because that action is a right action. If it takes the wrong action, I will not support it. As most moral human beings should, or decent human beings with the correct moral compass should. No one chooses the country of birth. So here, country, it doesn't mean the state. So here, back to back. You see, they're using country two different ways. So no one chooses the country of the birth, so it's foolish to be proud of it. Well, I slightly disagree. You can be proud of your country, uh, and still be born in it. Because you like its history, really, uh, it, the country is, your culture is produced by how humans act and human behavior, and some of that is due to the people born in it. Others are due to immigrants. So you can be proud of the country of your birth. Some will slightly disagree, but I think it is absurd and stupid to be proud of something just because you're born into it. But this is like saying it's absurd or stupid or foolish to be proud of your family. Like, no, you can be proud of your family. You didn't pick your parents. Um, there's no shame in being proud of where you're from or proud of your community. Our race has many superior qualities compared with other races. It depends upon what you mean by superior qualities. All races have qualities or have things they're better at than others. For example, many, on average, blacks or African Americans are better at certain sports, basketball, for example, because they have a better track record of jumping and even running than the average white guy. So an Englishman. And there are some sports or some thing that white people are better at, and there's something that Asians are better at, on average. So, but in this context, what it means by my race or our race, it's asking intrinsic superiority of it. So I would disagree. No race is inherently superior to the other. All races have things, qualities that they are better at than others, or things that they do better at than others, and there are races that have quality that are more crappier than others, but that's the way of life. But I don't think that's necessarily about a race issue as much as a genetic issue. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. as a philosophy, no, I disagree. I think the enemy of my enemy is still my enemy. Um, we may align with each other, with a common enemy, uh, and team up a wee bit to take down that common enemy and then just go our separate ways afterward. But the enemy of my enemy is still my enemy. We may have similar interests, similar goals, but we're still enemies. Military action that defies international law is sometimes justified. I think that sometimes gets you. Yes, I think there may be time where inaction is taken that defies law, that it justified. That an example would be, let's say, if you knew that a threat immediately, let's say and I'm going to first deal with person to person interactions. You just get word that uh, a person around the block is coming to your house to shoot you. You would justify to actually shoot first, I would argue. It's still a form of defense. It's proactive defense, but you're justified in taking proactive measures to defend your family. In the same way, I think sometimes it might be justified to use means that are generally disapproved of by others, um, even society at large. Um, but that doesn't mean it's unjustified just because other people disapprove of it. So I think generally the only time military action is justified is in defense. That's the only time it's justified. So, and sometimes that defense may rattle in buck so-called international law. Um, Mostly nowadays, that's not the case. So, mostly nowadays, most defensive measure would be in the bounds of international law. But you can imagine a situation where international law is just the opinion of what various nations think. So you can imagine international law, for example, would thumb down their noses at, like, say, Iran for taking military actions against, I don't know, the United States or Saudi Arabia. Uh, Even if Iran is justified in taking that action. I know plenty of people were condemned Israel when they took action against Iraq. Um, I'm not totally exactly sure if that's justified or not, but it was. Israel, for some odd, bizarre reason, thought the Iraq had weapons or whatever that threatened them, then they may have been justified in bombing Iraq's nuclear program. Not Iran, but Iraq, back in the 90s. The only person who refused to condemn Israel at the time was Congressman Ron Paul. But the United States condemned them, and other international nations condemned them. So, but anyhow, going forward, there is now a worrying fusion of information and entertainment. I disagree. I get what this question is asking. This question that it's basically, okay, there's a worrying why there's confusion, but the worry is that, okay, the entertainment may go too far and it just becomes strictly entertainment and information is law, or with passive information due to the entertainment value, um, become distorted or watered down. But I think you can um, make that balance easily, so I'm not too worried about it. So next page. If it goes to the next page. 2 of 6. Now we're working at the economy. We're talking attitudes here, not the FBSC index. Um, people are ultimately divided more by class than nationality. I would strongly agree. Controlling, in fact, I would argue that class here is, unlike the communist, I would define class in the context of those who have access to the powers of government and those who don't. As simple as that. And those with access generally are the rich, but not everyone who is rich has access to the state or or use the state to favor them. Controlling inflation is more important than controlling unemployment. Strongly agree. I think the government shouldn't be attempting to control either. But namely, the government is what causes inflation, particularly government-approved banking or cartel. The banking cartel is the cause of inflation. But if we're going to have a national bank, we shouldn't. We should abolish it. But if the Fed wants to continue, it should only do one job and one job only, and that is to rein in inflation and keep it stable, keep the money supply stable. It's impossible to juggle between the two mandate that the Fed had. The double mandate that the Fed is to control inflation and encourage employment. Those two contradict each other. So you can't balance them. You have to have one or the other. And employment is irrelevant if the dollar that you have can't buy the goods on the shelf. So at the store. So inflation is much more important in controlling. Because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, they require regulation. Now, Karen Ann Harlow did this. She said she agreed, but she accidentally pressed strongly disagreed, even though she meant agreed. Or they may have been, I think it was this one that she did that on. But anyhow, because corporations cannot be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment, as if the government can be trusted. This presupposes that the state can be trusted. But furthermore, when people think of corporations, I think that's the problem Karen Ann had. They always think of multinational corporations or big corporations. Not all corporations are big. All corporations are the form of structure of a company, as a business structure. Some corporations are small. Some corporations are big. Not all corporations are alike. Some corporations can be trusted to voluntarily protect the environment. Others can't. But even if you don't trust corporations to voluntarily do anything, this is what the market is for. The job of the market is, through the price mechanism, is to signal what consumers want. And in a freed market, in order to survive, a company must do what its customers or must placate to its customer base, because otherwise it'll go out of business. Furthermore, this is what property rights are for. Prior to the 21st century, prior to the 20th century anyway, um, property law is what prevented people from, companies from polluting too much. Because if they pollute someone else's water rights or land, devalues it, they could be sued. It is in the 20th century that the courts stepped in and sided with the corporation and said, look, we have because of neo-mercantilism, we're trying to fight and actually even the 19th century too. We're trying to get ahead of the rest of the world and become an economic superpower ourselves. It is in our interest. We get more reward by allowing this company to pollute a little, just for the sake of economic competition abroad. So they sided with them to violate property rights in order to for economic competition with other countries. Ironically, the reason why we can't trust corporations to quote unquote protect the environment is precisely because of the state. The state's war against property. So yes, it doesn't follow that because you can't trust anyone to do something, that therefore the state should regulate them. I don't trust some people to not do drugs, but that doesn't mean the state should come in and regulate them and compel them to not do drugs. It's simple. So I most strongly disagree. The conclusion does not follow from its premise. From each according to his ability to each according to its need is a fundamentally good idea. I strongly disagree it isn't. It is only a, quote, good idea in the context of the family, of a small family unit in which the father is through the actions of being a parent, had decided to take upon himself the responsibility of taking care of the kid. So in that context, yes, from each according to its ability, the parent, to each according to its need, the child. In that context, sure, that's a good idea. In the context of an economy, no, it's a bad idea. It's a terrible idea. It's one in which it will incentivize people to not work. The freer the market, the freer the people. Strongly agree, because the market just is the people. The people are the market. Without a free market, you have no free people. And vice versa. A freed market economy is an economy where people are liberated and are able to live the life that they see fit. That's it. They're free to trade with whomever they want to trade with, and to associate with people they want to associate with, and disassociate with people they don't want to be associated with. It is a sad reflection on our society that something as basic as drinking water is now bottled, branded consumer product. Strongly disagree. It is a good thing that something as basic as, quote, drinking water is branded consumer product, because that is the very mechanism by which clean water becomes universalized and becomes the standard and becomes the norm. prior to the advent of commercializing clean water, very few people actually have it. Furthermore, it is the very mechanism in which we can maintain clean water in the midst of tragedies and storms, such as earthquakes and hurricanes and tsunamis and volcanoes. So, yes, consumerism actually, well, or um, may have some drawdowns or drawbacks, at least aesthetically. It may not be aesthetically look good, but its results are superb. It has some great benefits, and one of which is it um, it makes that which we um, vital, that we used to strive for as human, that people in the third world still strive for, still um, long to have, that becomes commonplace. It becomes the norm. Furthermore, just because it's bottled up and because a private institution is selling it, doesn't that isn't what makes it a quote consumer product. It already is a consumer product, even if the only person who's selling it is the state. Sorry, but your local water supply company, or water company, is paid by taxpayer money. You're paying for clean water. So it's technically consumer product. It's just one company that's giving you the service. With this kind of a branded consumer product and bottled, gives you competition in that product and hence cheaper water. So, continue. Land shouldn't be a commodity to be bought and sold. Strongly disagree. I think Georgists are incorrect. In fact, again, the problem with Georgism is number one, it's communistic, but number two, um, it winds up reverting to land being a commodity that's quote unquote bought, or at least rented. You're renting that land from the state. But the question: how did the state get it? How did they become the arbiters uh, of of the use of that land? How did they come to quote own it? Uh, the answer is through force or just through fiat. There's no basis for that. The only way you can legitimately own a good is by acquiring it through homesteading or through buying it or through barter trade. At least that's how you acquire justly acquired property. And land, like any other, is a scarce resource, and thus as a scarce resource is subject to the laws of supply and demand, and subject to dispute resolution. Then how do we peacefully resolve disputes or um, not have as many disputes? Economic transaction. The buying, selling, and trading is how we peacefully live and deal with scarce resources among each other, allocate scarce resources without violence. It is regrettable that many personal fortunes are made by people who simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. I disagree on number one. I disagree with the premise. There aren't many people who quote simply manipulate money and contribute nothing to their society. This is a flawed argument. Many people who make money through investments also wind up contribute to their society through charities and through um, owning and through buying, not just buying stock, but buying capital goods, which lift up the wages of workers and other means. So, while there are some people who do nothing else for society other than make economic benefits, um, it's very rare. Most people make fortune through um, stock exchanges. What they mean by manipulation of money, they don't mean what the Federal Reserve does. What this means is what they're asking is about uh, buying and selling of stocks, generally. But otherwise, yeah, I would say it is regrettable for that certain people, namely politicians and bureaucrats working at the Federal Reserve, make their living by manipulating money currency. Um, so in that respect, I would agree about this. It's regrettable that occurred, but it can only occur because the state created it, made it that way. Protectionism is sometimes necessary in trade. Strongly disagree. It's never necessary. Um, Protectionism, particularly in this context, what it means is tariff. Taxing your own civilians because of what other countries do uh, is like beating your spouse because your neighbor is beating his. The only social responsibility a company should be, the only social responsibility of a company should be to deliver a profit to its shareholders. Um, this is well, I think humans have a responsibility of doing much more than just delivering uh, a profit and losses. But the way they deliver profit, though, generally is through the through delivering a good consumer or a good product to the consumer that the consumer likes, that pleases the consumer by serving their fellow man. So really, the social responsibility of a company is to serve their fellow human being, and in so doing, they may or may not uh, deliver a profit to its shareholders. But the reason a company exists is precisely um, ideal to make to make money for its shareholders or for the people who own the business. Um, Not just, and the shareholders could be a sole proprietor, the only person who owns it, or it could be the bank, it could be whatever. So I slightly agree, but I think a company has a moral responsibility to, because the company is made up of people, that people have a moral responsibility to their fellow man to do good by them. The rich are too highly taxed. Yes, strongly agree. All human beings are too highly taxed. Could the right amount of taxes zip? Those with the ability to pay should have the access to higher standards of medical care. Well, yes, I would agree that those who pay more should uh, have a right. Uh, it makes perfect sense for them to get more of what they pay. Um, I don't. Yeah, government should penalize businesses that mislead the public. Um, Depend upon what I mean. The public, if a business is committing fraud, if they are selling a product, making people to believe something true about the product that the company knows is not true, then yes, it is the state's job to enforce contract. It's the state's job to if a government is to exist, then it's the state's job to protect property. And fraud is theft by lying. But otherwise, no, it isn't their job. So this is most slightly disagree. So the only time they should penalize a company for misleading or mislabeling is fraud. That's it. So, or, yeah, lying itself is not a problem. It's not a criminal act. Um, Stealing through lies is. Um, and the question, who gets to say whether or not a thing is a lie? Um, or what counts as misleading the public? A genuine free market requires restrictions on the ability of predator multinationals to create monopolies. Um, no. In fact, all a genuine free market requires is the ability for an institution, a big company, to come into existence to compete with all others. It isn't there to prevent people from creating a monopoly. It's there to make sure monopolies, or that a free market, a genuine free market, is one in which no restriction exists barring people from entering into a market. That's it. If there are no restrictions in place, then there is no, aside from de facto monopolies, there aren't any legal monopolies. That is to say, there aren't any monopolies that can be enforced by the threat of a gun. So, in fact, all actual monopolies, real monopolies, are those enforced by the state. To disagree, actually, on the former one, I'm going to agree on the issue of mislead the public. I'm going to say fraud, but just because of that nuance, I'm going to put agree on that one just slightly. Abortion when a woman's life is not threatened should always be illegal. This one's a tricky subject for libertarians like myself and for others. Most pro-lifers are going to say no on this one. Most of them would argue that or a good number of pro-lifers would argue for three exceptions: rape, the life of the woman being at stake, threatened, and incest. I honestly do not understand why incest is a exception to the rule, exemption. The logic behind that particular exemption that they come up with. That to me sounds like playing God. So it's killing an infant for the crime of being born to people of the same family. So, no. Or for having the wrong DNA, like, too Hitler-esque at that point. But that's not what this question's asking. I understand the rape exemption, but it's one on emotion. Again, the problem with this, that exemption is precisely that it penalizes the child. If you believe abortion is murder, it's penalizing the child because the crime of its parent, or one of its parents, against the other parent. Now, if in this case, we're defining abortion as, and I think this is how not just taking the fetus from the womb, but terminating the life of the fetus, as abortion as it currently is practiced. I'm an evictionist. I hold a Walter Block's position, which is that a woman has the right to evict, that is to take the fetus out of the womb of his mother in the gentlest way possible, but she does not have the right to kill it. She does not have the right to hire a doctor or someone else to terminate that life, to an active killing. So, but with that being said, because I'm an evictionist, this is an interesting question at this point. It doesn't actually answer this particular question. So because we do not have the right to kill it, we would argue that yes, abortion should always be illegal, or should be illegal, with the exception of threatening the life of the mother. But here's where it gets thrown in. It's complicated because we're dealing with infants prior to the age of viability, or in the stage of an embryo, I would argue, are not living person, meaning they're not breathing entities with life in them, and as a result, you cannot kill one any more than you can kill a corpse. So with that being said, I would argue for the first, at least for the first trimester, abortion should be allowed. Second trimester possibly as well. Third trimester absolutely criminalized, with the or make it illegal, with the exception of a woman's life being threatened. So generally, on principle, I would agree, more or less agree with the Senate with this over all other pro-life positions. This one is the most consistent, makes the more sense, but because I do not buy into a particular framework, life at conception position, and because evictionism says a mother has the right to evict at any stage of the pregnancy, which means that under current law, those pre-viability, or at least those prior to the fetal stage of development, which means those in the first and second trimester, will indeed be, the eviction will eventually result in their death. So I'm going to slightly disagree. Not strongly disagree, because I don't have a strong opinion. For me, abortion doesn't play that much of a role in politics. I love to see the day in which the market resolves this issue in toto. The politics will not resolve it. It's not a Republican, by and large, don't care to solve this issue, because it gives them fundraising power. They fundraise off of abortion. And if they resolve it today, if it criminalized across the board, they would lose their fundraising abilities. Same with Democrats, by the way. All authorities should be questioned. Strongly agree. You should always think for yourself and not trust the opinion of somebody just because it's an authority figure. Always question truth can stand up to honest questioning. Yeah, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Strongly agree. The libertarian view of justice is a restitutional form, which says that if I, let's say, wrong you, let's say I stole a cup from you, I should pay you. Or I should, A, at the very least, return the cup. B, I should also now pay you double for at least, not just one tooth for a tooth, but I would argue, let's do TV. I stole a $200 TV from you. let's assume the TV is brand new for some odd reason. $200 TV. I have an obligation to at least return the TV, but let's see if I already sold it. I owe you now $200 because that's the TV law, and because I now caused you to have to go and pay expenses to try to bring me to justice or whatever, and now I owe you that expense. Better argue, you basically pay through that expense by the following mechanism, and this is actually comes out of the Bible, that a thief, at least in certain items, you pay double. So I not only owe you $200, I owe you double that amount. I owe you 2 times of what I stole from you. So I owe you 2 TVs for every 1 TV. That is to say, I owe you $400 total for stealing your TV. I think this is the libertarian position, or the correct libertarian position of justice, is to make right a wrong. So generally, justice is seen restorative or rehabilitative or punish. Libertarian says both and. They're not completely at odds with each other. You can rehabilitate, restore through quote unquote what is seen technically as a punishment. It's not purely punishment, not purely rehabilitative. It's both in one. That one shot is restorative. It's to restore the victim back, at least as much as possible, back to where he was prior to the crime was committed. Certain places that isn't possible, like death penalty cases or rape cases. But you can do as much. That's where the justice system comes to figure out, okay, what is the closest we can come to compensating for those crimes. Death penalty cases come into play at that point. Taxpayers should not be expected to prop up any theaters or museums that cannot survive on a commercial basis. Strongly agree. Nor they should be able to be expected to prop up businesses such as Walmart and Apple and Google and Amazon and whatever. Banks. We are against all government granted privileges and monopolies. We're against all state sanctioned propping up of companies, including Planned Parenthood, including big corporations, including unions. Schools should not make classroom education or attendance compulsory. Strongly agree. All people have their rights, but it is better for all of us to have different sorts of people that should keep to their own kind. I would disagree. By the way, I should know, I forgot to do it earlier, that there are questions such as opinion about race, such as certain races are more superior to the others, or my race is much more superior quality than other races. And this question had no bearing on politics, or well, this one can. I mean, you could, if in this case a person is seeking to use the state to bring about racial division or bring about segregation, then that's political in the true sense of the word. but otherwise, it isn't political. You can be a perfect, but this statement, you can be a good libertarian and hold to this position. You can believe that, look, all races, all people have their rights, that they have property rights, that you cannot infringe upon them, cannot aggress, you cannot take their property, you cannot hit them, you're going to leave them alone. But, I think that those people of a certain race and the people of another race should not congregate with each other or whatever. You can hold that position. You can hold segregationist position and still be a libertarian. Because all libertarianism is about is two things: property rights and non-aggression. Meaning, not trust. Aggression here is defined as initiation of force against another. This is to say that it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to beat them up, it's wrong to invade their property. Their property either be an external property, like this cup, or their body. This is why rape is wrong, it's why murder is wrong, it's why kidnapping is wrong, it's why theft is wrong. And it's why all of those should be criminal, provided whether or not there was a state or non-state. Good parents sometimes have to spank their children. I don't think this is a question that deserves to be on a political quiz. It's not about politics. This is about general ethics. Technically, you could do, okay, spanking is a form of quote-unquote aggression. Maybe. But that's about parenting. This is a philosophy of parenting. It isn't a philosophy of what the state should and should not do, and what it should or shouldn't allow. In fact, this question doesn't even ask that. It's nothing about the state. Question is, good parents sometimes have to do something. I'm actually neutral. Maybe there are cases where spanking is the only option that a good parent do. Or maybe a good parent should never spank their kids. I know that the data doesn't say one way or the other. Whether or not they're a good parent is subjective. I'm going to personally, I think maybe that there are cases where a good parent should sometimes, quote unquote, spank their kids. Let's say get their attention to not hurt themselves. Just as sometimes it is okay to push somebody in the street to get them from being hit by a car, or grab them from killing themselves for a day, and talk the thing through, and then let them do what they will. So, yeah, but as a whole, I personally hold to and believe in peaceful parenting as much as possible. But there might be cases where spanking is required. I personally don't think that example is really small kids per se. Threatening to spank is irrational if the kid can't be reasoned with another ways either, so it doesn't make sense. They're not, in fact, generally threatening a spanking is only going to make them continue to do what you don't want them to do at times, especially with small kids. But again, I think that's a bad question for this quiz. Is natural for children to keep their... Yes, of course it's natural. This is Um, so yes, it's natural. Strongly agree, but again, this is a question that has nothing to do with politics. It's about human psychology at this point. Possessing marijuana for personal use should not be a criminal offense. Totally agree. Your body, your choice, is more than a abortion slogan. Uh, also, property rights is more than just a slogan as well. The government should not dictate who can and cannot own a good or service, nor should it dictate what you can and cannot put into your body. The prime function of schooling should be to equip the future of generations to find jobs. Um, this is a good question. I think the prime function of schooling, particularly if we mean of kids, should be to teach them what they need to know to read, write, and do you think to be a good functioning human being. So to make their own living and to sustain themselves. So in that degree, yes. To the question, other degree, that doesn't always mean find a corporate job or something of that nature. Um, but I don't think, again, this is not a question of politics. You can have schooling without having the state. So I'm gonna agree only in that what I think it means to equip the future generation to not to find jobs, but to sustain themselves. Um, yeah, so I guess I'll agree that people with serious inheritable disabilities should not be allowed. Strongly disagree. The state should not dictate who can and cannot have kids. This is dangerous territory that lead generally to genocide. The most important thing for children to learn is to accept discipline. Um, no, I think that's not the most important thing. That they should learn that. But discipline doesn't mean spanking. It means instruction, um, and correction. But that's not the most important thing to learn. I think the most important thing for them to learn is ethics. What is right and wrong, how to be a decent human being. There is no savage and civilized people. There are only different cultures. No, I think they're savage. Here, culture and people groups are really synonymous. It seems synonym. There aren't savage people. There's only different cultures. Like, no. Um, I'm sorry. I disagree with this. I think there are savage cultures. Groups. The Aztecs were savages. So cannibalistic tribes are savage. Um, so yeah, Mennonites are civilized. Yeah, there are deep different cultures. Some of them are more civilized than others. Those who are able to work and refuse the opportunity should not expect society support. Strongly agree. When you are troubled, it's better not to think about it, but to keep busy with more cheerful things. This is not a political question. It's a life philosophy question, a psychological question. Um, in some cases, this is a good thing to do. In other cases, not. It really depends. But I'm gonna disagree. Um, Generally, this may actually be a bad advice. While it may temporarily um, alleviate suffering, in the long run, it may be more damaging. In fact, suicide is largely due to people shoving off problems and not thinking about them and dealing with them as they arise. So, first generation immigrants can never be fully integrated when they're in their new country. Strongly disagree. Actually, they can. It's rare, but it can happen. What's good for the most successful corporations is always ultimately good for all of us. Strongly disagree. Um, there are things that are successful for corporations that aren't good for all of us. So, while generally speaking, there may be successes of companies that may actually, because they provide a good on the market that people want, that there is a good in for all of us. It's not always the case. Um, Companies such as arms industries is an example where what's good for an arm industry is never good for society at large. It's only good for politicians and bureaucrats and uh, killers. No broadcasting institution, however independent its content, should receive public funding. Agree, because no institution should. About wider society, oh, well, gee whiz, they asked him that question earlier. Our civil liberties are being expressly curbed in the name of counterterrorism. Yes, it definitely is, if anyone who's paid attention to the CIA and the NSA lately, and the FBI. The significant advantage of the one party state, such as Soviet Russia or Mao China or communist China, is that it avoids all argument that delay progress in a democratic social system. Well, technically, one party rule may wind up avoiding all arguments in that nobody gets to vote on it. So, but on the other hand, some of the same issues that the two-party system has in play does happen within one party. It just happens to be internal politics rather than external. Fights for power within the party wind up being displayed. So, but there's in certain ways, yes, that is a advantage of one party rule. Is that there's not a um, competition between sli- even slightly differing ideologies. Um, you don't have to form allegiance or an alliances with another party to get your way. You can go ahead and get your will through no matter what, just because everybody's on the same team. That is an advantage in that type of system, but arguably it's a disadvantage too. That means the minority oppress these much more easily. That means that a progress that actually is, in fact, would argue a delay in what the state considered progress is actually a good thing and not a bad thing. So I would disagree overall. Although the electronic age makes official surveillance easier, only wrongdoers need to be worried. Strongly disagree. Everyone should be worried because the state gets to decide what is and is not illegal, and what crime they are willing to prosecute, and generally they can prosecute anything that is on the books, and generally most people don't know what the hell is on the books. So the death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. I agree it should be an option for murder and maybe certain degrees of rape, but definitely murder, it should be an option. Namely, murder is. I would advise that you read Walter Block's essay on, or listen to a lecture on this issue. You can imagine a system in which, because of restitution, a machine in which you can take the murderer's body, put it in to one side of the machine, and the victim's body on the other, and transfer the life of the murderer to its victim, in which case the victim is made whole through this process as restitution has occurred, but also the murderer died. The guilty party actually had to give up his life in this case. But that would be a death penalty, and thus it's justified under libertarian ground. I would also recommend estoppel, libertarian theory of punishment, by Kinsella, in which he argued, and it's arguable that the second a thief steals from you, he has given up any claim to against you if you seek to defend your property through lethal force. So, and through other means, arguably the murderer is forfeited his right to life, especially once they committed a crime, they automatically forfeited their right to liberty. They are now owe you a debt, at the very least, of some sort. They have to pay you back one way or another. So they do forfeit either some property that they have. This is through restoration, pay you double, whatever. So they forfeit some amount of property or liberty itself. Slavery, for example, or imprisonment. So either case, they're forfeiting some type of right. In this case, I would argue that murder is such a crime that they forfeited. They've demonstrated through taking the life of another human being that they do not value life itself. They do not see life as an inherent right, and that they forfeit any right to complain about somebody attempting to violate their right to life, and that they're forfeiting their right to life, if you will. So, in theory, I'm not against the death penalty. I think the death penalty should be an option. In practice, my position is that the death penalty should not be enforced by the state, administered by the state, particularly federal government, anyways. Namely because the state has a terrible track record of getting only the guilty. So I would say in the most serious crime, murder, and only in those cases where we're absolutely sure that a particular person is guilty, should we actually implement the death penalty. But otherwise, I know many libertarians are against the death penalty. I'm not one of those. In a civilized society, one must always have people above to be obeyed, and the people below to be commanded. No, I disagree. I don't think you always have to have this. I think in certain scenarios, hierarchy makes sense. Other scenarios, hierarchy is not required. So we disagree. You don't always have to have this as a hierarchy in a civilized society. Abstract art that doesn't represent anything shouldn't be considered as art. Again, this has nothing to do with politics. Here it's asking your view of aesthetic. What do you find aesthetically pleasing? This is this is a stupid question. Personally, I don't care it shouldn't be considered. I might in theory actually agree with this. I'm gonna say I'm gonna disagree because I don't believe in telling what other people should view aesthetically pleasing to them. In criminal justice, punishment should be more important than rehabilitation. I disagree. As I noted earlier, the goal of justice, I would argue, is restoration, which is a type of rehabilitation. Restitution or restorative justice is the main element of justice, or the purpose of criminal justice. Um, the rehabilitation, but restitution really bridges the gap between punishment and rehabilitation. They're not completely at odds, but I think rehabilitation is more important than punishment. Um, it is a waste of time to try to rehabilitate some criminal. Um, because it says some, I would agree, but that some means serial murderers. Uh, that some people, that some criminals are people I would argue shouldn't even be alive. Like, okay, the business person and the manufacturer are more important than the writer and the artist. I disagree. I mean, to a certain degree, yes. To a certain degree, no. This is economically the manufacturer. Important to the writer. Yeah, I'm gonna disagree. Um, uh, economically, I think the businessman and the manufacturer provide a service to people that they need or want, but the writer and the artist also provides a service that people want, and that they both serve some function in society that satisfies consumers on the market, and people pay to enjoy those issues, and they're required for mental health development and other aspect of life. So I disagree. But again, I don't think this is maybe an economic question. It's not a political question. I think this should not be on the quiz. So again, there are like 2/3 of the questions on this quiz that I think should never be on it. Mothers may have careers, but their first duty is to be homemakers. Um, Again, this should not be on the quiz. It's not had nothing to do with politics. Um, this is about one's view of how the role of women in the family. So personally, I would agree that generally their first duty is to make sure the kids are taken care of at home or whatnot. Um, but in some cases, then maybe the father who has that duty. Um, I'm not against reversing those rules per se, but as a rule, that is the job that females have historically taken place, even voluntarily, I might add. In evolutionary, that actually make the much more sense. It makes sense why that relationship actually exists, how it came to be. If you believe in evolution or whatnot, or at least um, through the development of human psychology and human sociology, physiology too. Why fathers go out and hunt and provide the food. They're generally uh, by average, the most stronger of the sexes, and women are generally by nature the most compassionate. so they can actually interact with children better than much more caring than males are by average. So naturally, mothers tend to do better as homemakers. So, but I don't think that's the political question. If the question was worded as the state should come in and compel mothers to be homemakers, then I I would disagree with that. If it said that mothers should not have careers or should be barred from careers, I would put a strong disagreement. But the question as is, personally, I agree with it, but this has nothing to do with politics. Should not even be on the quiz. Multinational companies. Do you hear what I mean? A corporation, large corporations are unethically exploiting the plant genetic resources of developing countries. Some of them are, others aren't. So it depends. Some are, some aren't. So because there is some truth to this, I will say I agree. Making peace with the establishment is an important aspect of maturity. Strongly disagree. If you get through this okay, you'll find that these propositions on religion are again, any question, I think most questions about religion should not even be on a political test. It's insane. Astrology actually explains many things. I don't give a shit. If it does, if it doesn't, it is irrelevant. Generally speaking, no. Um, but it's irrelevant to the quiz. Uh, if you're going to include these, you should at least have neutral. You cannot be moral without being religious. I strongly disagree. You absolutely can be moral and not be religious. I even argue that you can have a um, rationally based ethical system without appeal to religion. I say this as a religious person, as a theist. Um, this is actually a one area where I disagree with my fellow co-religionists. And when they make the argument for God, they try to make arguments from morality for God's existence. Um, I don't think they make that argument. I don't think that argument is as strong as my co-religionists want it to be. But I absolutely can be moral and not be religious. Charity is better than social security as a means of helping the genuinely disadvantaged. Strongly agree. Then this is actually a perfectly political question that should be on the quiz. That's not technically about religion. Some people are naturally unlucky. I disagree. I don't know. I'm gonna say I disagree. This it sounds like saying that certain people are superior and inferior to others. Type of scenario. Some people may. I don't see any evidence of to support that. It is important that my child's school instilled religious values. If it is moral values, I would agree. Personally, because I believe schooling should be privatized, I would say yes. Only, and even if I were to go with generally religious, all religions have somewhat of the same common value system. Don't kill, don't steal, whatever. I think, yeah, those should be taught. I have no problem with teaching comparative religion in public schools. In fact, I would actually encourage it if we're going to have a public school. I don't think we should. I think the state should cease to exist. Should not be I believe in the complete separation of state and schooling, or state and education. But I think a good, solid education includes a religious education. Finally, a look at sex. Sex outside of marriage is usually immoral. That's an interesting usually. I would say the only time it's actually immoral is in the form of adultery and of cheating. So we'll say disagree. Um, Generally, most religious people of Abrahamic religions would argue that sex outside of marriage is always a sin. I do not take that position. So, uh, same sex in a same sex couple in a stable, loving relationship should not be excluded from a possibility of child adoption. I would agree they should not be legally excluded. With that being said, a private institution has every right to exclude people from adopting from their agency on whatever requirement they set. So they can exclude people on the basis of sex, sexual relation orientation, religion, uh, income. So, anywho. But if the question is about politics, which I think is just what it's asking, is about law, I agree with the premise of the question. Pornography depicting consenting adults should be legal for the adult population. I agree it should be legal. Um, but on the former question, it should be noted that really, I personally think re- the only thing that should exclude the possibility of adoption to a couple is whether or not the couple can actually take care of that child. If they do not have the income um, capable of sustaining the child and caring for the child, that should be the excluding factor. And I think even single people should be able to adopt a kid. So, not just same sex couples. What goes on a private bedroom between consenting adults is no business of the state. Strongly agree. But this said not just about same sex between two people of the same sexes, people, period. Uh, BDSM, or uh, threesomes, polygamy, etc. All such laws should be abolished. No one can feel naturally homosexual. I will say I disagree. People can. My position is I don't think sexuality is completely. Um, uh, I don't think it's determined completely by genetics or by birth. I don't think you're born homosexual per se. Nor do I think you're necessarily born heterosexual either. I think sexuality is determined both by genetics and by upbringing or by uh, environment. That there's an interplay between environment and nature. Nature versus nurture debate, I side with it. There's an interplay between those two that generally results in that winds up um, determining sexuality, and I think real sexuality is something that becomes determinative later in age. So right about puberty is when it developed or when it's discovered or developed, either way. So I don't think there's evidence one way or the other whether or not it is natural or not natural. But either way, one's sexuality is going to feel natural in either case. That people are going, if they're whatever they're attracted is, okay, I don't think they can completely control that attraction. They can control behaviors to that attraction or behavior that inclinations wind up uh, seeking to drive you to. You can suppress that behaviors, but that doesn't mean that you can the actual initial reaction and attraction can't be controlled. So I disagree with this one. You can feel naturally heterosexual, homosexual, and even asexual. These days, openness about sex has gone too far, in certain contexts, yes. In other contexts, no. So, here we go. I am going to be down here. So in the Libertarian Quadrant, almost in no point in my quiz taking have I ever actually gone all the way down here for some odd reason. Even though I'm a radical libertarian, take radical libertarian position. But because this quiz has questions in it that should never be on a political quiz, I don't think anybody ever is truly where they're supposed to be at. Even people who are up here, I think, will be either should be further down than the test will give them, or further up than what the test than what they should be at, or further right or further left. So in this case, I would argue generally I'd possibly be further down, definitely much further downward on the libertarian scale than the authoritarian scale, and much more further right on the scale. So anyhow, that is my reaction. That's my results. I am definitely in the libertarian quadrant. That part isn't a surprise. Definitely not a surprise to me because I've already took the test multiple times. But I did want to point out the flaws in this test. That flaw is it asks questions that are not political and that don't belong on the test, and also it doesn't give you an option to pick neutral. So there are questions in which you can have no position at all and neither agree nor disagree. I think that's perfect to have no opinion about a question. So that is my quiz. That is my assessment of the quiz. I'm a libertarian, not surprised that I'm a libertarian, and this is a flawed quiz. I wouldn't trust it to pinpoint Adolf Hitler correctly. That's how flawed this quiz is. So with that being said, I will let you guys go, and tomorrow I think I will make a new video detailing another quiz, one I think is way much more better and does a way better job at asking questions, asking relevant questions, and only relevant questions, and see where they go. In fact, I may actually do two quizzes. One quiz is from the Center for Stateless Society. We'll go through that one, and the other is a Specker quiz that deals with political spectrum. I can't remember the .com or .org. I can't remember, but I will do that quiz as well. It's going to have the same diamond shape, fourth quadrant that people can go into, but ask way much more better question than this one does, and I think it gives you a better range of options to choose from. So I will now stop stream. Shalom.